we'll be discussing is how has the security vendor world changed in the past decade? But before we get into it, Peter, are you okay just to give us a quick introduction to yourself, if that's okay, mate?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Nick. So, yeah, I'm Peter Cohen. Worked in cybersecurity now for must be just over 10 years. So, first forays into cyber were with MWR Info Security, small research-led, mainly offensive security consulting organization. We launched a detection and response service called Countercept that grew super fast and was like a really exciting part of the business to be in. So I was the global sales director for that part of the organization. We were then acquired by F-Secure, the Finnish cybersecurity consulting organization, and we were part of them for a couple of years. I then moved on to start the European office for another consulting organization, Holistic Cyber, so a US Israeli firm. And again, that was very much around nation state grade red teaming and advisory. So spent a lot of time on the kind of attack side, and I've recently moved back over to the blue team with Push Security, where we're looking at identity threat detection and response. And I've been in role now for must be coming up to a couple of months.
Okay, perfect. Lovely introduction there as well. So let's jump straight into it then. So obviously, talk to me about, because we've had this chat outside of this podcast, and we was kind of was just doing a helicopter overview of the vendor world. How do you sort of think it looked like 10 years ago compared to how it looks today, Peter?
Yeah, far more immature, I would say. As you know, as you'd expect, kind of a decade ago, cyber wasn't exactly like a nascent industry, but it was very much finding its way and it was growing up. And so there were some definite kind of growing pains, and it did look very, very different. It was on the cusp, really, of I think fragmenting into many of the kind of different point solutions and different bits and pieces that you kind of see today. So that was kind of starting to happen, and um, some of the bigger players in the market were about to be disrupted by the likes of, CrowdStrike had pretty much just launched about a decade ago, and they were kind of, they'd started with like some incident response and threat intelligence, and they started to then build out their platform and become, the multi-billion-dollar organization that they are today. 10 years ago, probably about to the day, it was Mandiant that almost launched this entire process with the release of their APT1 report as well, which was a look at Chinese nation state hacking against US and other Western industries. And this report was like an absolute kind of, grenade gone off in the corridors of power in Washington, in London, in boardrooms kind of across the world. People were saying like, hang on, there's like organized cyber offensive activity against my steel mill, against my technology company, against whatever it is we do. We're in the crosshairs of the Chinese government. This is a problem, but I've got no idea what we're going to do to solve this problem. So this was the kind of backdrop of the industry 10 years ago. People were realizing that there was this massive issue to solve, but the ways to solve it weren't fully understood. They weren't well understood. It was not really particularly strongly regulated, and the guidelines of how to do it, weren't really well known. So this laid the background for something that I think represented the vendor industry back then, which was basically like an opportunity to take advantage of kind of all this backdrop. Firms know and organizations know they have to do something, but they're not sure what. So that was kind of how it was back then, and now, I think it's done a complete 180. I'd say present day is totally different, but I'm sure we'll get onto that.
Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit like, how did we start to move then? What actually started to happen in the sort of mid 2010s, when it's like, okay, we've got something here, like there's an opportunity to actually for the vendor world to expand. Was it the funding that changed it? Was it politics, like you say, you mentioned there with China, US? What actually started to put the fuel in this engine to start move everything?
Yeah, there's a few factors. So firstly, like organizations were actually starting to get breached,
Good.
right? It was happening quite a lot, and when it happened, it made the news, and everyone knew about it. You had the
Mm.
mega breaches that sort of really at the time, like this is all off the back of Stuxnet was kind of became kind of like cybersecurity folklore, but it also made its way through kind
Yeah.
of the wider community and industry as well. But then there were other breaches as well that were kind of big back in the day, like kind of the Target breach, or others that people would say, "Oh, household name Target, they got breached. How did that happen? They came through the air conditioning. Like that's crazy. That's out of Mission Impossible. Like what do we do?" And so people started to really understand that this was happening.
Yep.
And when it did happen, it made the news. So that drove like a lot of organizations to quickly like spin up budget for cybersecurity programs. And sometimes that was spinning them out of IT, and other times that was trying to bring in kind of external expertise, or kind of a mixture of the two. So that was the first thing. Secondly, these breaches, they cause some damage, right? They cause damage to the stock prices of
Yep.
these organizations. Like, so you saw 10 years ago, if you were breached, you saw a huge drop in stock because of the uncertainty. No one really knew what that meant. Like, does it
Yep.
mean your company's going out of business? Can they operate the factory that they had, that whatever they make is reliant upon? Has all the personal data been stolen? Like remember TalkTalk, like the loss in value after that was huge because no one really knew what could be done with this data, or what was going to happen. So this uncertainty that came out of it actually had impact on the share price, and as we know, impact on share price has got a big impact on executive remuneration. So
Yep.
CEO, CFO, CTO, board level remuneration is linked to share price performance. So
Yep.
suddenly you've gone from a world where no one really knows about cyber to, if this thing happens, the CEO is going to get paid less.
Yep.
And if you link those things together, that's going to cause cyber to get in the crosshairs one way or another, right? And that's what started to happen within organizations.
Yep.
And then over time, we saw that smooth out,
Yep.
right? So that kind of drop in share price started to happen a bit less, like less of an extreme.
Yep.
I actually saw a recent study, like breached over the last couple of years, actually, against firms on the Nasdaq. Actually, that drop in share price is statistically insignificant
Mm.
over, if you look kind of 2 to 3 to 4 weeks on, after the initial breach. So
Yep.
now, like that's changed because the CEO remuneration is no longer linked to whether they get breached or not. So
Yep.
things have changed a bit.
Okay. Yeah. Two really interesting points. I just want to kind of surmise there. So. So what you're sort of saying then, and this is just to check my understanding and correct me if I am wrong. It firstly came more out of media and branding, obviously, when like you say, we are getting hit. These big names are getting hit. Cyber is a real thing. Like, oh, maybe we need to start paying this attention a little bit more. So, initially, did it sort of come from a place of like, yeah, protecting the brand, but then it flipped over in the sense of we all know that security it isn't necessarily a direct ROI, and therefore, like you say, CEOs can be forgiven in one essence to be like, well, I'm not going to spend loads of money on security because, like you say, they don't earn my company money. I'm speaking very obviously naively and succinct in quotation marks here, but just for the benefit of the audience and the fact that we've got time constraints, I have to. Um, so obviously, with that being said, do you think that it these breaches needed to happen in order to sort of kickstart the security world in the sense of like, look, no one's bulletproof. Your company's stock is going to take a hit. Your company's branding is going to take a hit if you don't take us over in the corner, the security guys, a little bit more seriously. Is that sort of what you were saying? Yeah.
Yeah, completely. And it plays out in the annual reports of companies that have been breached, right? So if you go back, I was ill in bed with flu like 7 or 8 years ago,
Right.
5 or 6 years ago for a couple of weeks. And in my second week, I got so bored, I started reading the annual reports of companies that had been breached, like both before and after their breach.
Right.
And it's like unbelievable to see the contrast, right? So pre-breach, you got a company that's never been hacked before, at least knowingly, and certainly haven't been reported on. You
Yep.
might have security, cybersecurity, information security appear in their annual reports like 2 or 3 times,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In a 140-page, filing.
Yep.
Post breach, it's like 100 times, 150 times. Like cybersecurity, cyber information security, like it took a breach to turn a company that was paying it lip service to
Yep.
suddenly this is the most used phrase in the report.
Yep.
And yeah, to your point, like the industry needed
Yep.
the breaches to get to the state that it is today. And
Yep.
if we're honest, like that is one of the dirty little secrets of cybersecurity,
Yep.
is that on the consulting side, on the vendor side, like everyone knows there is nothing quite like a breach to focus minds. But equally, I think that's also true on the CISO and in-house security team sides, right? Because their kind of internal awareness, the politics attached to budgeting and
Yep.
control over policies or IT systems, like that's also driven by perception, and a lot of that comes from kind of reporting as well.
Yep.
So frequently it'll be like a throwaway comment from a board member to the CEO who's read something in the Financial Times about a cyber attack, and that can make or break someone's budget for the year when it comes to a security program. So yeah, like I think that's I think those breaches, did they need to happen for the industry to be where it is today? Like 100%, right?
Yeah.
And equally, like if they didn't, then you could also argue that is the industry needed? And clearly clearly it is, because they are happening and they continue to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, obviously, one of the reasons is breaches happening. Okay, so one that I also wanted to basically pick your brains on is politics and geopolitics as well, because we seem to be inside very very close to what is going on in the wider world, whether that be obviously, the Russia and Ukraine, Israel, US, China. We've got all these superpowers that does have an impact on the cyber world. So, what's your view on it? Do you think that the geopolitical landscape has a quite a significant impact on the security vendor space?
On the vendor space, like, yeah, it depends is the answer to that. So if you're a vendor and you're supplying critical national infrastructure, government, anything that's a legitimate
Mm.
target of a nation state or aligned hacking organization, then they care about this stuff, and quite rightly so, because you see week in, week out, there'll be another campaign from China targeting US telco infrastructure, or Russia targeting political parties or European governments, or whatever it is that
Yeah.
they're after. And that's all driven by geopolitics, and that's not going anywhere. And that's always been driven by geopolitics. And actually, like, this has been happening for hundreds of years. It's just an extension of espionage taken from taken into the 21st century,
Yeah.
and sped up a lot, because the cycles around cyber can be incredibly fast, whereas like these things used to take, you used to have to send like an envoy from Europe to China on the premise of expanding Christianity, a bunch of monks who are actually going to go and steal the secrets on how to make pottery. This
Yeah.
took hundreds of years. Right now, it's coming back the other way, but and it takes minutes, right? So,
Yeah.
but it's just an extension of what's always happened. So yeah, like geopolitics and cyber have long been intertwined, and it's like an incredibly complex topic that I don't think we're going to get to the meat of on here. But from the vendor perspective, I think what has changed is that 8, 9, 10 years ago, you could probably get away with, as a vendor, with casting the geopolitical nation state attack kind of argument as a means to any organization, any company who you're talking to should increase their cyber capacity, because this might happen to them, right?
Yeah.
Russia might come for you. Why? Because even if you're a firm that makes kitchen roll, right, they're going to come for you because kitchen roll is part of the supply chain of whatever hospital, and this is means
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you're in the crosshairs. Like 9 years ago, like that was happening, like that was part of like the vendor space, is just try and make it as relevant as possible to them, scare them, and maybe they'll they'll fund the project.
Yeah.
And security teams quite liked it as well, because you were doing it, because like it helped them get more budget, because the CFO would think, oh, that makes sense, yeah, I'll release budget for that project. So it did like lift the overall security posture, but the way in which it was done was probably like mapping to the wrong threats, but it was the kind of
Yeah.
geopolitical threats that people were reading about and they could really sort of understand.
Yeah.
And I've got, there's some like an example spring to mind. Like a colleague of mine, like this was like a crazy move. Like he was in to see an organization on the south coast, and to talk about detection and response service, and that south coast of the UK. And the week before, Russia had sent like a small flotilla, like a cruiser and a destroyer down the English Channel, just as like a kind of saber rattling show of force. This must have been about 2016, 2017,
Right.
something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, so he turns up at this office on the south coast, and these people could probably just about, like with binoculars, have seen this Russian flotilla
Yeah.
go past. And like the argument that he used was that the Russians can potentially, hack you as they go past.
Oh, okay.
And it's obviously like complete rubbish. Like,
Yeah.
but that's the argument that resonated in the mind of the CFO when should cyber be funded or not, and that's what released $750,000 in funding to get detection and response program in place, which this company genuinely did need. So was it the right way to do it? Like, no, it's crazy. Did it work, and did it get this company where they needed to be? Like, yeah. So it kind of depends. That would you could never do that now, ever. Like nowadays, people are like, CISOs are good, right? Like all of them that I've met pretty much are excellent at what they do, and they know their priorities. They know the gaps. If they want a second set of eyes on the gaps, they know who to turn to do that. If they want to communicate them internally, they know how to do that.
Yeah.
And the days of the vendor space helping to dictate what that maturity program should look like are well behind us, right? And that's now moved from the vendor space, or the vendor space contributing very much to more of like a framework led or kind of compliance led set of requirements, which CISOs are very comfortable with mapping their cybersecurity maturity programs to. So the likes of NIST coming along and publishing their frameworks, and there's others that people use as well, like that is fantastic, right? It means that companies can benchmark exactly where they are on a given kind of set of scales that's standard, and it's now become the vendor job to do two things. One, to show where you fit into this maturity journey, and two, come along and perhaps just articulate to those organizations where that kind of standard framework isn't quite enough, because they do face like an elevated level of threat, or what the organization does means that it's exposed on different fronts. Come in and show like where your product or solution or service maps to specific needs that you have as an organization when it comes to cyber defense. So it's very much like that regulatory framework, that cybersecurity maturity standardization from the likes of NIST, things in the UK like the Bank of England, or the PRA coming in the US, like similar. They've got the SEC requirements, so regulators starting to cut their teeth and like bare their teeth. And actually, like a lot of what organizations need to do now is based around standardized requirements, and those things are generally pretty good. Like, and if you follow them, then you're going to meet your regulatory obligations. And these have come in as so these have come in as the impact of a breach on the share price has gone down. So you've actually had like the pain point of organizations has been replaced from actually the CEO is going to take home less money because the share price has gone down, to the company's going to be hit with like regulatory issues, which could again ultimately cause a fine and weigh on the share price. But this regulatory kind of driver is now standardized and understood by everyone in the industry, and it's more on that and less on something that's kind of a bit more nebulous and harder to get to grips with. And so vendors have had to, if you want to be successful, you need to understand that that's the landscape you live in. You can't walk into a Caesar's office and tell them this is what the world looks like, because you get laughed out of town. Caesars know, and they're very good at understanding and communicating that internally. So it's, you need to adapt to that. And I think that's been difficult for some parts of the industry. You just have to see what some people are attempting to say on kind of social media or part of their own marketing campaigns that maybe just look a little bit clunky, outdated. If you look at it and it jars a bit, you think like, oh, like that's probably because it came from someone that came up with about 8 years ago, and they're trying to replay it because it worked back then. It doesn't work anymore. So I think we've all had to evolve.
Absolutely. No, fantastic point that. And what you said there about obviously Cecil's being much more educated about the vendor space now is unequivocally true. I think from my standpoint as well, because like you say, a lot of I did a podcast just a few weeks ago just about a CISO, a recruiter, and a salesman walk into a room together, and the joke writ itself. To be honest with you, Peter, I don't have to do too much selling on that, but the point where we raised a few stories about Leo, who was the CISO on the podcast, some of the approaches that he gets off vendors and off recruiters, and one of his bugbears was like when salespeople from vendors would come in and try say like, you've got all these problems and my solution can fix all of them, and it's sort of saying like, well, do you not think that I understand my own tech stack, and do you not think that I do my own assessment of it internally anyway? So fully echo your point there. I just wanted to sort of ask your opinion on if the tech space in the vendor world has changed in the last 10 years, because modern day, as we're speaking now in middle of October 2024, you've got all sorts of different technologies, whether that be quantum, AI, threat intel, security awareness, you name it. We could be here all day sort of naming the subsectors of technologies. Has that changed? Was it a little bit more succinct and sort of like one hat fits all 10 years ago? I say that naively.
I'm not sure it was actually. I think it was probably as fragmented. You definitely had cybersecurity, the cybersecurity industry spinning up like a whole range of crazy tiny point solutions to tiny problems. Sort of 8 years ago, and I think we've seen a bit of a period of consolidation in many ways, as like definitely the past couple of years. Vendors have tried to consolidate into kind of single platform offerings, which commercially and from a contracting perspective, and if it does all play nicely together perspective, then that can make sense. But that also, the argument there also against it is, are you using the right tool for the job? And actually, as long as everything is compatible, which you do want to make sure, are you kind of choosing based on your own tech stack and based on your own needs as a security team and capabilities and where you want to get to, like, are you actually choosing the right thing? And are you putting all your eggs into one basket as well? So I don't see the industry has changed from a fragmentation perspective, really. Like, there has been efforts to consolidate, but that has also come with, as that's happened, people in this industry are entrepreneurial. Like, when they get acquired as part of consolidation, they'll stay for the year they need to stay to get their earn out or their the last options vesting, whatever it is, and then they'll leave and do it again, right? We see it time and time again. Like, you can't keep a good person down. I think that's going to continue to happen. And I think the other side of that as well is on the threat side. Like, the way in which threat actors do iterate the the ways that they try and breach organizations, like, that does continue to move on at pace. Like, every marketing advert in our industry starts with like the evolving threat landscape. But it's a bit of a cliche, but it's kind of like it remains true, right? So we saw 10 years ago attackers hammering on the perimeter because it was likely you'd have vulnerable applications or misconfigured firewalls or something that you could just get in. Then as an industry, like we got better at securing that, and then attackers started going for the endpoints. And then the likes of kind of CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, and Defender, and Carbon Black came along, and suddenly, like an attacker, like you can land on an endpoint, but it's going to take you like a hell of a lot of effort to get there, and you've probably got 20 minutes until CrowdStrike come along and flatten you, right? So actually, as an attacker, that doesn't seem so appealing anymore. So we're now at the stage where attackers have thought, well, sod this, like I'll just get some credentials and log in. Like, what are you going to do about it? And so now we're in this kind of era of identity threat detection and response, which is what push security do. But it's very much, if you look back, you can see like the attacker actions do continue to evolve, and that is because the blue team continually steps up, right? So that is another reason why the fragmentation of the industry is always going to be the way it is, because attackers move on once the blue team evolves, and if they move on to something that no one's providing, someone's going to step out of their corporate comfort zone and build it, right? And we move on, and that's how our industry's always worked, and I think it's a really strong part of the ecosystem.
Absolutely. And I've pretty much got one last question for you, Peter, as we've come to our time, and it's centralised around the funding of security vendors. Now, typically today, you see security vendors, and I say this on average, you know that you always get anomalies with the funding. And seed, you can get anywhere between 1 mil, 5 mil. Obviously, it can go up to 10 mil, that. But then, obviously, Series A, more often than not, between 10 and 20, and then Series B and Series C starting to times that by 2, 3, whatever it might be, depends on the sort of technology of the investors on where it is in the roadmap. And then obviously, if you throw in AI in it, you might as well just make it 6 digits now, or even more. And so, with that being said, has it always sort of been the case with Seed and Series A, Series B, or has it sort of really changed in the sort of last few years? The more sort of awareness that we're getting on cyber, the more money that it's getting in the funding that's then trickling down the system. What's your thoughts on
that? So I did some kind of analysis on this a few years ago. I haven't done it recently. I can tell you what it's like working in a Series A organization, but I think it's always been the case that funded organizations with VC funding follow a similar playbook, right? So if you look back, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, organizations with backing were spending probably 5 or 6 times the amount that they spent on R&D on sales and marketing, right? So you see organizations with 150, 200% of revenue spent on sales and marketing. R&D would be kind of 20%. It would be like the gap, the chasm between what you're actually spending on cybersecurity was like way less than what a cybersecurity company would spend on sales and marketing. To the extent that like a large organization like a I don't know, JP Morgan or something was spending more on cybersecurity overall than the largest cybersecurity vendors at the time, who were spending like all of their money on sales and marketing. So it was this really kind of like imbalanced world, and that I feel like that has rebalanced a little bit, right? I feel like on the vendor side, organizations do grow up slightly faster. They need more of a mature, well-developed, enterprise-ready offering. Something that can survive like a demanding enterprise customer base using it from like day one, because that's like how that's essentially the playbook of cybersecurity companies, is to go try and get as many enterprise customers as possibly can. If you can't play in that space because your product doesn't work, like your company's dead. And it takes a lot of investment and a lot of thought and process and maturity to put into your product to get to that point. And maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, probably maybe wasn't quite as much focus on that as now. Like it has to work, otherwise you're out. So I think that's probably changed a little bit for the better, I would say. It's I think everyone benefits.
Absolutely. Peter, Thank you very much for your time. If anybody has any questions raised today, or just simply wants to learn more about Push's products, where Peter works, they're doing some crazy work in the identity ASM space. So I'll be sure to put all the links in down below. But Peter, once again, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, Nick.